Ready? Good morning. Good morning and welcome to day 2 of the AAPC's 50th anniversary conference. Before we get to the morning's first panel, you have an opportunity to vote for our second People's Choice Award. You'll recall from yesterday that for each major category of Pollie Award, you'll have a chance to choose among the top entries as determined by our judges to receive a People's Choice Award. The winners in each category will be announced Thursday evening at the Pollie Awards Gala. The category on which you will be voting this morning is radio. And here are the top-rated entries for you to judge. The first entry is 9 arrests for the Congressional Leadership Fund, Wisconsin 1, i.e., the firm is FP1 Strategies.
Squad car 580, we have reports of a swerving vehicle. Do you read?
This is Squad car 580. We're on the scene. We have a drunk driver in custody.
Can we get an ID on him?
Yeah, his name is Randy Bryce, repeat offender.
Randy Bryce has been arrested 9 times. Driving while under the influence, driving on a suspended license, drug possession, property damage, theft. Randy Bryce has been arrested 9 times.
We have a drunk driver in custody.
Can we get an ID on him?
His name is Randy Bryce, repeat offender.
9 arrests? Randy Bryce has no business making the laws. He's spent his life breaking the law. Congressional Leadership Fund is responsible for the content of this advertising. Paid for by Congressional Leadership Fund. Not authorized by any candidate or candidates committee. www.congressionalleadershipfund.org.
Okay, there's a good way to start the morning. Our second finalist for Healthy Appreciation for Brian Kemp for governor, the firm was Something Else Strategies. The campaign had enough cash for 1 or 2 primary ads, so they were tasked to make the most of those messages and make the runoff. They did that successfully, and Kemp won the primary nomination in spectacular fashion.
I'm Brian Kemp. This is Jake, a young man interested in one of my daughters.
Yes, sir.
Jake asked why I was running for governor. I said 1,
Cap government spending.
2,
Take a chainsaw to regulations.
3,
Make Georgia #1 for small business.
and 2 things if you're gonna date one of my daughters.
Respect,
And
a healthy appreciation for the Second Amendment. Sir.
we're gonna get along just fine.
Brian Kemp for governor.
I'm Brian Kemp. I'm so conservative. I blow up government spending. I own guns that no one's taking away. My chainsaw's ready to rip up some regulations. I got a big truck, just in case I need to round up criminal illegals and take them home myself. Yep, I just said that. I'm Brian Kemp. If you want a politically incorrect conservative, that's me.
Paid for by Kemp for governor.
Okay. Our third finalist, Hagen Kingdom for the Conservative Alliance PAC. The firm is Content Creative Media. Hagen Kingdom was produced to support Ohio Republican State House candidates aligned with Speaker Ryan Smith. The radio spot used humor to effectively message against Hagen and help deliver the primary win for Stolzfus. Is that right?
The Hagen royal family. They think we work for them. It's been that way for years. First State Representative John Hagen, then State Representative Christina Hagen, and now they're planning to anoint a new king, young Josh Hagen. He's running for the same seat to sit on their Hagen throne. We're their peasants, depositing nearly $1 million in the Hagen treasury. And even though Josh's only known job is as an unlicensed service technician for a family business that has never been registered with the state of Ohio, it doesn't matter. No qualifications, no real-world experience, no record of public service. That's no problem when you're a Hagen. Just ride the family coattails. At least that's what Josh Hagen thinks. But every dynasty must come to an end. It's time to topple restore the Hagen kingdom and stop the Josh Hagen coronation.
Paid for by Conservative Alliance PAC, not authorized by any candidate or candidates committee, 216-931-0038.
Okay, for those of you who weren't here yesterday, the instructions for voting are as follows. Get your smartphone out, open the AAPC conference app. In that app, click on Agenda. Click on, are you there? Click on the day, which today is April 3rd. Then click on the session, Vote People's Choice Pollie Award Best Use of Radio. And then once you're in the session, click on the gold banner below the session description that says Vote People's Choice Pollie Award Best Use of Radio. Then cast your vote. If you didn't get all those instructions or you don't feel like doing it right now, we're accepting votes throughout the morning. And as I said, the winner will be announced on Thursday evening. Now I'd like to introduce one of our longtime sponsors representing an innovative force in radio, the Vice President of Advertising Sales for Pandora Media, Sean Duggan.
Morning. Always hard to follow a Randy Bryce spot, but please get your votes in. Great to be here. Thanks, everybody. Today we're going to talk about the power of sound, so perfect intro with Tom. The first data we process when we're in the womb is via sound. Mother's heartbeat, the voice of our parents, music in the womb. And then progresses to the first records. In my case, Elton John, classical music, and Rumors, I think, by the classic Fleetwood Mac in the 1970s. Music has a power to transcend and take us places, whether it's the iconic music, those first memories of sound, or a movie, a soundtrack that we heard when we were 10 years old. For me, that still takes me to 10 years old, 1981, somewhere in central Jersey, where I made the decision that I was going to start an archaeological dig in Westfield, New Jersey, in the back of our house. Again, these songs, and that's a piece by John Williams, and working with Steven Spielberg. The second piece I'm going to play for you, you'll probably recognize it in two notes. A great story that I love is when Steven Spielberg's second film was working on it with John Williams, he had forwarded him the rough cut of the film, and he gets excited. He gets over to John Williams' house, and he's like, sits down. John Williams sits him at the piano, and he goes, "Okay, Steven," and he proceeds to play two notes. And Steven, trying to disguise a little disappointment and confusion, was like, "Is that it?" And John Williams turned to him and said, "I think that's all we're going to need." The short of that is Steven Spielberg never doubted John Williams again over their 40 years collaboration and his judgment. Sound has a powerful way to transport us and inspire us. At Pandora, we're in the business of connecting people with music they love. That's been our heritage. Over the last 5 years, music streaming, digital streaming has doubled in the US. The power of sound is it's transforming our lives. It's predicted that next year, actual search by voice will surpass 50%. Driven primarily by Alexa, but think about that fundamental search. Instead of going to a browser, you're going to be doing it by voice. So, think about that strategy and how you'll be captivating that. What is your strategy for using that to reach out to candidates next year? Smart speaker growth, 300% growth since 2017. Podcasts, one of the latest bloomers, but again, launched probably over 25 years ago, but in the last 10 years has gone through a total renaissance. We We'll always be known for music, but now we have over 1,000 podcasts available on Pandora, and there's a snapshot of our browser to find the content you love. You know, as a part of XM Sirius now, which became officially in a little over 2 months ago, you know, our mission is to connect you with the audio entertainment you love, whether that's gardening, cooking, sports, or the music of John Williams. You can find it on Pandora. That's our mission, to become the best music company in the world and audio entertainment. What's this mean for political campaigns? You know, for voting age listeners, with our new partnership with SoundCloud, which became official at the beginning of the year, we now reach 104 million voting age listeners every month. And now think about that. You're reaching listeners when they're usually not in front of another screen, maybe reaching a lot of cord cutters, people who are habituated to a different way of consuming media than maybe 10 years ago. What's it mean for you as you're going and thinking about your campaign strategy? You know, we have a unique ability. We ran with over 600 campaigns last year to work with, whether you're working with a city council race or a statewide election, or getting ready to launch a presidential campaign. We have a unique ability to either build that candidate ID, or another thing that we're trying to get out there in the market is, what's the sonic ID of your candidate? Have you thought about that? What is your game plan? If you're leaving that off the table, you're missing a huge opportunity to outrun your competition, or else see them outrun you in 2020. So I'll leave you with this. How are you using sound to inspire voters for 2020? Again, there's so much opportunity out there. We don't claim to have all the answers, but we really want to work with you to be part of that solution set as you're trying to figure it out. So we really are excited to be here at the AAPC this week, and we couldn't be happier to be a part of this kickoff panel with this very talented group who's going to share how women are taking over the elections and the world. So thank you very much, and have a great week.
Our first panel this morning will focus on the historic gains for women candidates in both parties in this past cycle, in how women are running and winning. Please welcome our moderator, fellow AAPC board member, Joanna Burgos.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you all for being here. We have a great panel for you all this morning. We're going to talk about why women are running and winning, and hopefully learn some tips to recruit more women, help them win. With me here today, I have Molly Murphy. She's a pollster with ALG Research in DC. In 2008, she is proud to have helped Kristen Sinema navigate a tight race and become the first woman elected to the U.S. Senate from Arizona. Molly has also overseen numerous victories at the congressional level, including the recent victories of Ayanna Pressley in Massachusetts 7 and Donna Shalala in Florida 27. She's done extensive research work for progressive issue organizations, including Emily's List and Planned Parenthood. Thanks, Molly, for being here.
Thank you.
Also with us today, we have Kate Mader. She's a California-based political strategist who has been working in Democratic politics for a decade. Before joining the award-winning media firm Cooley Struble, Kate served as the lead strategist and campaign manager for Eleni Kounalaki's successful campaign to become the first woman elected lieutenant governor in California. Thanks for being here, Kate. Then we have Ashley Rich Stevenson. She is a pollster and general consultant with WPA who has guided major election victories for her clients, including serving as general consultant for Senator Joni Ernst's historic win in 2014. She's moderated focus group research among independent women in swing states on behalf of presidential campaigns, and has worked at all levels of the survey research and political consulting industry. Thank you, Ashley, for being here. And last but not least, our only man on the panel, Justin Brazel. He's founder of Mississippi-based Triumph Campaigns. He's a proven campaign strategist and mail vendor. Justin has managed or served as general consultant on successful campaigns across the country, including Governor Kristi Noem's successful 2018 gubernatorial campaign in South Dakota and Senator Cindy Hyde-Smith's campaign in 2018. Kristi's the first female governor of South Dakota. Cindy is the first female elected to federal office in Mississippi. So thank you, everyone, for your firsts for women candidates. Now, the subject of recruiting women to run for office always seems to be a struggle, right? And a challenge that's really difficult to overcome, I think, for both parties, a little bit more for the Republican Party. And I think, maybe you guys agree or disagree, I think a lot of times the media likes to focus on our failures, not having enough women and the women that we aren't able to recruit. Now, I'd like today to kind of highlight the successes that we've had, and maybe your stories can help us all recruit more women. Now, can you talk to us through some of the successes and maybe the failures that you've had in recruiting, and what do you think made the difference? Want to start, Molly?
I'll jump in first, just to get this conversation going. I mean, I think on both sides of the aisle, we have a few problems. I mean, we have a pipeline problem. We have to overcome some of the family obligations that a lot of women have. And then third, the imposter syndrome, which I would love to hear from fellow panelists, if you've come up against this, where women feel like they're not qualified. They feel like their resume needs to be a mile long. So those are kind of the first few things that are top of mind for me.
And I would also add to that the fundraising tends to be the biggest barrier when I'm meeting with women candidates who are considering a run for office. They have the motivation and drive. Often I find that women candidates are considering a run for office because of some sort of triggering event in their life that makes them want to get up off the sidelines. And there have been studies that back this up. The Barbara Lee Foundation is a great resource for research into both in terms of voters and how they perceive women candidates, but have also done survey research among women candidates themselves. And so these women are tending not to look at themselves as lifetime candidates wanting to be politicians. They are motivated by something that has happened in their lives, be it a healthcare scare, something with a parent, something with a family member. Where they stop short is the sort of structural barriers that exist. And in 2014, this Barbara Lee Foundation study found that the two biggest reasons that women were hesitant to run for office were a concern about an ability to fundraise adequately and a concern about getting their party's support, getting sort of the institutional players behind them. I think the 2018 elections have proven to be a fundamental shift, and it will be interesting to see a study like that in 2 or in 4 years, where women candidates this past cycle tended to outdo their male competitors in terms of both fundraising and party support. But I do think that those things can really feel like they are complete barriers to entry, and I think part of the reason is exactly what Kate said. There is a sense that for women in any industry, not just politics, to go for a job, they have to feel like they have 100% of the qualifications necessary for the job. Men, I think it is around 60 to 70%. If they feel like they're most of the way there, they'll go for the job. I think if you think about the things that a candidate needs to have, institutional backing, fundraising, a network, a staff, all of those things, nobody walks into that. Nobody has 100%, and so it keeps women out because of even those qualifications.
Mm-hmm. I think that 2018 really broke a glass barrier for women candidates overall, giving a lot of credit to the Democrat Party, and it's interesting to hear your feedback relating to barriers because we saw so many women run on the Democrat ticket who had never held elected office before. Mm-hmm. And to build on those points, the challenges that we see in recruiting quite often are looking for women who already feel that they've met some sort of qualification. Perhaps they're a state senator or a state legislature. It's really interesting to see so many women on the left who had never held elective office before are now in the federal government. We're a part of that huge wave to help take back the House. So I think it's something for us to learn across partisan lines and really see what the Democrats were so successful in being able to recruit women to run. There's a new Politico article out this morning that I would encourage everybody to read. It's eye-opening about the barriers for female candidates, specifically related to fundraising. And as you think about your network, as consultants, we're always telling potential candidates, male or female, get your friends and family list together. Who can give you $2,700? Who can give you $10,000 or more? I imagine for most people that's a pretty difficult hurdle to cross. And these women who were elected to Congress in 2010 and 2018 just talked really well about the challenges, very clearly facing that you don't come to Washington to meet with consultants and necessarily have a list ready for $250,000 or more, sort of the barrier to entry to be taken seriously. And that's certainly a challenge, I think, that also stems party lines.
I agree. I think whether you're a man or a woman, the first conversation after, the family obligations and getting through some of the hurdles is how do we win? Mm-hmm. And fundraising being top of the list.
Great, thank you. Now, some in our industry believe that, we need more women voters so we can win the women vote, right? So let's get more women and we win the women's vote. Surely, there are better reasons and other reasons why we should have women candidates. Can each of you talk to us about what you really think is the advantage of having a female candidate? Maybe tell us a story about a moment in a campaign, this cycle or a past cycle, that you thought a woman handled a difficult situation only in the way a woman could.
I can start on that. I think I can sum it up in one word, which is diplomacy.
I was about to say that.
I saw, our candidates this last year handle some difficult situations and conflicts with donors and supporters and sort of talking people off the ledge when things got difficult in campaigns in, a way that left everybody with their egos stroked and their, feelings intact, and everybody left happy. And that's a unique skill that I think, in a lot of ways, some women have more than men.
Yeah, and in thinking about this question, just to echo that, our new lieutenant governor here in California is a trained diplomat. She was a U.S. ambassador. So I was like, well, is it because she's a woman, or is it because she actually has the skills to be, an expert in diplomacy and to have that grace and to rise above the fray? So I'm right there with you on that.
Yeah, I don't know that I can come up with a singular moment, or something sort of that crystallizes this. And I actually have a hard time thinking whether it's sort of women generally or the fact that a lot of the women who do kind of run for office, because they're less inclined to view this as a career path, they're more motivated by something fundamental, wanting to change something, wanting to stand up for something. It provides an authenticity and a sincerity that comes through to voters. And that's not just a woman thing, quite honestly. I mean, sincere and authentic candidates tend to do better than those who voters think are trying to take them for a ride. And so I think where women can excel is they tend to be doing this for the right reasons. It's not about the next step on a career path. It's not about the power. It's about whatever kind of motivated them to be there in the first place. Obviously, I'm speaking generally. There are plenty of male candidates on both sides of the aisle who also run for those reasons. But I do think that is something that is distinct. And I think that allows candidates to be more frank and honest with voters, to handle dicey situations with a little bit more sincerity as opposed to calculus. And I think that is sometimes the difference as well.
And in this political environment, what we've seen happen with Me Too and Time's Up over the last 2 years are just great examples of time and time again where we've had elected officials who are women and candidates who've had the courage to talk about their own experiences. I believe that this has really helped shed a light, bipartisan, across the aisle on such an important issue that is just so front and center and continues to be in the political arena.
Thank you. So, like Ashley mentioned, this past cycle in particular, the division between men and women really became stark, right? The Me Too movement, Time's Up, the Kavanaugh hearings. I'm sure each of you, with one candidate or another, had to respond to the movement or had to respond to hearings or an accusation in your race. Did you feel that the media or the voters expected something different from a woman candidate? And how did each of your campaigns use this movement, the momentum, as an advantage in each of your races?
I would imagine that most or some probably suspect that perhaps Republicans or conservatives may have been less aggressive to use this as an opportunity to talk about this and ultimately make gains. We saw this as an opening, and at our firm at WPA Intelligence, we actually built a national Me Too Time's Up model So we could figure out pockets of potential swing voters that we could have conversations at the individual level for our candidates, regardless of whether they are male or female, about an issue that we knew was so highly motivating to them, and just have a nice, good, open, one-on-one conversation with these people and bring it into the political space as we thought about our campaigns and how to win at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think that the dealing with Kavanaugh Me Too Time's Up was perhaps one of the most challenging sort of strategic questions of the cycle, because it depended on where you were, who your candidate was, and who they were running against. Mm-hmm. And so there was no one good answer. And it was extremely difficult, and I can't underscore that enough. What we would advise a candidate to do running in a Democratic primary was very different than what we would advise a candidate to do running in a much more conservative place, or a male candidate running against a woman candidate. There were so many dimensions to the complexity that it would be hard to give a 2-minute answer on sort of how did we handle it. What I would say about it is, ultimately, what we found in our polling research and in our focus groups in particular was that talking about this really mixed up voters. On one hand, they liked the shine the light. They wanted people to be comfortable talking about it and shedding some truth on something that most women have experienced in some form or fashion. But it's also a very uncomfortable and dark thing to talk about, and they don't want to always turn on the TV and be hearing about somebody else who's experienced something horrible. And so how do you strike that balance as a candidate, whether you're a Democrat or Republican, a man or a woman? And what we found was it really was about emphasizing values as opposed to finger pointing. And I think where your question sort of started and how the media characterized this, it became very much about who's bad and who's good. And ultimately, what we found is we need to sort of assert some shared values about how women deserve to be treated, how most men treat and respect women, and then also pivot back to sort of the larger issues that were at play in this election, which tended to be healthcare and the economy and things like that, to not wed ourselves and chain ourselves to this debate that nobody really had control over.
And I have an example from last cycle to highlight just that point that you're talking about. You know, here in California, we have a top 2 primary, and so Eleni Kounalakis was up against another Democrat. And with 19 million voters here in California, we found that issue to be so polarizing because right in the middle of the Kavanaugh hearings, we were engaged in an effort to text over 1 million Democratic and independent women across the state. And so some of the feedback we were getting, you know, because we'll say, you know, Eleni, in the text, right, Eleni Kounalakis is going to hold sexual harassment, you know, perpetrators accountable, and, you know, those kind of talking points. And a lot of the feedback we were getting, especially from independent women and even Democrats, was so visceral that they would get a text message. Our volunteers would often get a text message back where the Democratic woman would even say, I could never vote for a Democrat again after what they're doing to Kavanaugh in these hearings. And it was sort of jaw-dropping because, you know, Democratic women in coastal California, you know, they're pretty progressive. And so it was like this instantaneous pulse poll that we had. And so we decided to change our scripts because, you know, we needed a broad unifying message, and we couldn't use it, we couldn't leverage it for our advantage.
We saw in the case of Kavanaugh the ramifications for somebody like Senator McCaskill. We modeled more raw voters in the state of Missouri who supported Kavanaugh than had voted for her in 2012, more than she ultimately ended up getting again in 2018. So that's a case where a female candidate, the position that she took to bring up how difficult this was, regardless of whether you're working with a male or a female, it was a very difficult thing to navigate. That told us pretty early, you know, in the fall, whenever this was all taking place, that there was a serious ramification for her to be no on Kavanaugh, and the math was there at the end of the day.
I found it to just be very partisan. You know, everybody had their jersey on, and there wasn't, you know, in conservative states that I was working in, Mississippi, South Dakota, you know, you could almost, how you viewed that issue, you know, you could determine whether you're a Republican or a Democrat. You know, there just wasn't that many sort of swing voters who were vocal on that in my experience. It was just so partisan, you know, one way or the other.
Thank you. So we're going to ask, I'm going to ask one more question, but if you all have a question that you would like to ask, I would start preparing that. And Elena is going to walk around with a microphone just as we finish our last round here. And, my last question is pretty easy. It's just, what's next? What do we as consultants, as operatives, have to do to, is it create the next women's movement? Is it recruit more candidates? So what do you think is next?
I think that's the hardest question. What's next? I think that, if I'm being totally honest, I think what got a lot of women on the Democratic side off the sidelines was Donald Trump. Mm-hmm. And that was the triggering event for a lot of these women. Yes, that's been happening for women off the sidelines because of things that were hyper-personal. But I think you need to look no further than the fact that a lot of Democratic women felt like it was, if not now, when? And what can I do to stand up and fight against this administration in every way I can? A lot of women started voting when they had never voted. A lot of women started donating when they had never donated. A lot of women started running when they had never run. That is lightning in a bottle. And so I think, Donald Trump will not be president forever, I hope. And so, does that sustain, or is it a moment in time? And so what I hope is that what we have, a byproduct of the motivation that Trump has offered, in these women, I hope that it is validation and not viewed as a singular moment in time, so that women do not look at, the opportunity to run as the barriers are too high. They look at the successes of women in both primaries and in general elections in districts that are very conservative, for me, as a Democrat, in districts that are more conservative than Democrats typically do well in, and they say, no, I can still do it, and that parties and, institutional players also look at women candidates who don't have $300,000 at the drop of a hat and still say, this is the type of profile, this is the type of candidate who can do well. We need to nurture them and support them. And so I think what's next is making what I think was truly a moment in time a validation for, sort of sustained and long-term progress.
From my perspective, I think it really matters if we have more women behind the scenes running these campaigns, and not just working in fundraising or scheduling, but working at every single aspect of the campaign. Thank you. And I'm so encouraged by how many women are at this conference, this week, but we still have a lot of work to do to recruit, to mentor, and to train and sustain women in this field. So I think that going forward to 2020 and the following cycles, I think that should be a priority for everybody.
We're already seeing in Republican side that more women are interested in running for House, frankly, than we expected, coming after last year's banner year for Democrats. So stat I heard yesterday that I thought was really impressive, 57% of the top tier recruits who have met with Leader McCarthy are women. I think that that's very encouraging. I would be encouraged by it if it's what we saw happening on the left, and gave a lot of kudos and panels after the election to our friends who work in Democrat politics, because they had a tremendous year recruiting women and helping them. I think that we see Republicans, because of this motivation, heading in the right direction with the recruitment efforts that we're doing. There's a lot of great things happening in terms of Elise Stefanik's new PAC to support women, Winning for Women. We're seeing Republicans, rank and file in the consultancy space, starting to get together and try to emulate what the left has just been so tremendous at doing and supporting their candidates with Emily's List and things like that. So I'm hopeful that the movement is behind us. We're actually looking at building something that we call the Cleopatra model, which basically is, as we know in survey research, it's hard to ask people if you would be more likely to support a woman. There's a lot of response pattern bias. Frankly, people lie. We're trying to figure out if folks would think that women should run the world, essentially, and what that looks like and how we use that math to our advantage. So we'll see how that shakes out, and hopefully it helps us increase our numbers in the House, because we need to get back to where we were about 10 years ago. So,
I think for Republicans as a party, it's about starting at the local level and building a bench, right? To have great female candidates for Congress or U.S. Senate, you've got to have great women getting elected to state legislatures and mayor's offices and things like that. So I think for us as a party, the challenge to keep making progress is to build a bench.
Great. All right. Any questions from the audience?
Molly, what was the name of the study that you referenced?
It was the Barbara Lee Foundation. If you go to their website, they've got a research tab, and then they publish all of their reports. Mm-hmm.
Any other audience questions?
I just want to say, Kate, I did appreciate you talking about the imposter syndrome. Can you talk a little bit more about what you're trying to do to mitigate imposter syndrome? Because it's actually a very significant challenge that some people face, maybe not only women, but even minorities, when it comes to leading an organization or working within an organization.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this coin word of imposter syndrome really does relate to nearly anybody who feels marginalized or feels like the other in a situation. And I think that a lot of the things that we can do is, if someone is legitimately qualified, right, is to support them and to get other people to validate them as well. Because at that point, if you're actually qualified, we see oftentimes that sometimes we have over recruitment, where people are thrown into a shark tank and they're not necessarily prepared for it. But if somebody is qualified and would be an excellent candidate, we need to make sure at that point it's sort of just emotional, right? It's like, you can do this, and you have to set up structures and almost like scaffolding. I mean, it's a campaign manager, general consultant sort of task, right, is to make sure that they think they can do it and create structures within a campaign for them to realize their own actualization, right, and achieve it.
Good morning. Excuse me. Chicago just recently elected last night its first ever African-American female mayor. And had the other candidate won, it still would have been Chicago's first African-American female mayor. Not the first female mayor, that was Jane Byrne, and not the first African-American, that was Harold Washington. But we also have the first African-American female city treasurer in Melissa Conyers-Irvin. I'd like to ask anybody, how did that happen? And what does this mean for the future?
Well, I live in San Francisco, and I'm really proud that our city elected the first African-American woman, London Breed, to City Hall. And I just think change is coming. I think that it's time that women of color especially were pushed into the limelight or given an opportunity and just supported. And I think a lot of people need to take a step back and create situations where they are lead and supported. And I just think that there's a change coming.
I would also say, and I wasn't directly involved in the Chicago elections, but one of my partners is based in Chicago and did a lot of work there. And so I'm cribbing from his takeaways from the election. But one thing that I think is true in Democratic primaries in particular, and while Chicago's election, it's an overwhelmingly Democratic city, and so the turnout is overwhelmingly Democratic, but we saw it in the primary between Joe Crowley and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, between Capuano and Ayanna Pressley, is that while I reject the notion that women support women, because people support their partisan. I think that you're exactly right. If you're a Democrat, you support Democrats. In primaries, right now, I think that voters tend to go into a primary knowing that whoever comes out of it is largely going to reflect their values on issues. They're probably all going to vote pretty similarly. There are exceptional circumstances, sure, but they don't necessarily worry that when they are voting for one candidate over the other, one's going to support their views on education, one won't, et cetera. And so then other qualitative factors come into it. And that is where we've seen the tide shifting and the change coming, which is you saw primary voters prioritize diversity and change in a way they really had never done before. It was, Chicago is yet another example, as opposed to the first, of a bad night, and I don't mean last night, I actually mean their primary in February, a bad night for white male candidates. And that includes among white voters and white male voters who are just increasingly looking to shake things up from a diversity standpoint. And then I think the other part of this is not to underscore or take anything away from the quality of the women candidates running. And so they are well funded and able to communicate with voters. They are able to, sort of elevate themselves so that it is not just a name on the ballot, but voters are going in and knowing who these candidates are.
In 2020, a female candidate, either party, what, in your opinion, are the two sole topics they should focus on? Like, should it be education, jobs, healthcare? What, in your opinion, for either party, should they exclusively focus on?
I think we saw healthcare, we know, is the driving issue on the left. About 85% of the dollars spent on paid television for Democrats was focusing on healthcare. I think that for Republicans, especially female candidates, this is a place where we need to get proactive in getting our message out and use this as an opportunity to get some gains back in our favor.
I think beyond issues, it's authenticity and real world experience. Like, you know, a lot of voters now don't think serving in Congress qualifies you to do anything. It's about, you know, what real world experience did you have, you know, outside of politics? And I think, you know, for Kristi Noem, Cindy Hyde-Smith, the other, you know, candidates I've worked with, you know, that went a long way, right? Nobody wanted to run as the female candidate or, you know, to be the first female elected. It was about, here's my experience and what I bring to the table, you know, from, you know, running a business, running a household, you know, what experience do you have in life outside of politics? And I think, you know, you saw Elizabeth Warren in Jackson, Mississippi on her, on the CNN town hall, talk a lot about, you know, growing up not in a wealthy family and struggling to make ends meet and the experience she's had that, you know, connects her to, you know, voters. And I think, you know, beyond the issues of education and healthcare, you know, your experience outside of politics is important.
That's great. Any other, oh, we have one more question.
Sort of shifting gears off of messaging and more back to candidates and also the operatives that are in this business. Mentoring can be a way to help people succeed and increase diversity. Do you guys have any suggestions or advice or any personal stories about mentors that have helped women come through the industry? And as candidates, you know, do you recommend to your clients that the candidates find mentors that are also women, or any advice on that front?
I absolutely recommend that women candidates, more so than male candidates, find and talk to other women candidates when they're considering a run for office. I think that there are a number of reasons that it's important. I think one of the biggest ones is women candidates who are moms with kids who are still at home. I think that the biggest question for them outside of their viability and their fundraising and those sorts of things is how have other women who have been successful at this done that? And can I mirror some of those tips? So I think that a lot of times the mentoring isn't necessarily just about how do you reach out to donors, how do you expand your network, but how do you sort of juggle it all? And I think that that's a pretty critical component, and I sort of always recommend that and try to line up candidates who can give that sort of guidance. I think that that's true, you know, within this industry as well. I think that, you know, this industry is so about relationships that I've had mentors who have been fantastic women, but also fantastic and supportive men. And so in that regard, I actually haven't felt like I've needed to seek out predominantly women versus men, just because I think you want people who are going to be supportive. There can be a lot of elbows in this business, and so you want to find people who kind of tuck their elbows in and reach their arm out.
And I couldn't agree more on everything that you said. I think it's just so important on the topic of mentorship in this industry. I think it's important to recognize that this is kind of a long game, right? You don't just find someone for the quick cycle, but you want to invest in somebody who is going to be in this industry cycle after cycle, so that you are building those relationships. And with candidates, you know, maybe you have a candidate who just isn't ready for the next cycle, but you build a relationship with them and get them ready for the next one. So it's really about that long-term investment. And I love what you said about, you know, reaching your arm out and bringing them in.
Maybe it's a difference in our party, but I had kind of a different experience. I think I really struggled, especially at the beginning of being a mom and a consultant. And most of the people that I had to talk to were men. I only knew one other woman that was a political consultant that had a family. Most other women that were Republican consultants were single. So just in the last 5 years, I feel like there's tons of them. And, like Ashley was saying, groups of us get together and talk about it. So I think, maybe I think on the Democrat side, it's a little bit more established. I've sat on a lot of panels with Democrats and I always tell them, like, you're so lucky. But Republicans need to continue to do this and need to continue to provide. And I think it's on the men too. Be supportive and let them have a family. I know, where I'm at on Message, where we're at, we really support families. But, even they told me once, we've always tried to have women come, but they always end up staying at home because it is hard and the travel is awful and the schedules are really hard to juggle. So, I kind of had an opposite experience. I felt every advice I got from married men was awful. As I was trying to make a decision, they were telling me, oh, don't worry, your kids don't need you till later, and like, just get home by dinner time. And I was like, well, who's gonna make dinner? So, I mean, I can't stress enough to the Republican side how it was a real struggle. And just in the last few years, I mean, like Ashley and I both have small kids. There's like a much bigger group of women now. And we need that. So let's continue to have, campaign managers and things like that are women.
What Joanne is exactly right. I have had just wonderful people who have helped me through my career, but when it came time to having children, it was just a different experience for me. I've been very blessed that I've always worked with people who are so supportive and understand that as a mom, there are certain things I need, whether it's go home early to get my kids, somebody's sick, no issues whatsoever. But it's been a complete blind spot as I look to people to emulate who are mothers as opposed to fathers, because I do think it might just be a little bit different in approach and frankly just managing it all the same as a female candidate and looking for an appropriate mentor for them. Because as we go back to talk about recruitment, the number one conversation I've had with women when we think about running, talking to them about running, it's never how much money do I need to raise is top of mind, or what's my team gonna look like? It's what is life gonna be like when I get there? And I think that that's really awakening. Very different approach than when you talk to men about running for office. So it's always sort of putting the family or the other things, whether you're a caretaker, those sort of things first, is a big difference I've noticed.
Well, and it's a question that women candidates get that male candidates don't. And I will echo that I definitely hit a massive hurdle when I was pregnant and just pitching and going into a meeting, and the questions you get about the fact that you're going to take some maternity leave and that means you're disappearing into a hole and you're not going to come back normal. So I will say it happens on the Democratic side too. I do think that we are probably, maybe from what you're saying, as a consultant community, much more embracing, but I still think candidates who are anxious and want somebody to hold their hand all the time have a harder time setting that sort of thing aside. So that struggle exists, but I do think women candidates also face it, that, I've had so many women candidates with young kids who, get so frustrated that they'll say, well, how are you gonna commute to Washington with your young kids? And, their response is, well, my male opponent also has young kids, and it doesn't seem like you're concerned about his commute to Washington. And so, I think that double standard does exist. And I do think that the burden, and I won't speak for men on this one, but I'll speak for my male colleagues who have said this to me, which is, it is, especially when your kids are very young, it is very different, the expectations, just as a woman yourself, as a mom yourself, to be there a little bit more, to cut short the trip, to take the 5 a.m. flight as opposed to flying in the night before. All of those things, I think, are a burden that women bear, and it is to say nothing of male consultants who are not present, they're present fathers there, but my colleagues will say the same. You put more pressure on yourself than we do as dads, and so I think even just recognizing that, I think, is a step forward.
Great.
Just coming off of Equal Pay Day yesterday. So one of the, I think, innovations in the last cycle was that we are finally allowing women candidates to use campaign funds to pay for childcare. But one of the things we don't do in any of our trainings is actually prepare women financially for the hurdle of running for office, both those that are in public service already, giving up their jobs in order to run, or second, giving up their income. Do you think that there are going to be, can we destigmatize the idea of women taking salaries from their campaigns, or how would you otherwise help meet this gap of women in places where they're primary breadwinners being able to take the step back to not just raise money for their campaign, but still be able to provide for their families?
I think that I believe that all candidates should be able to take a salary from their campaign, male or female, because I think that the problem with, I think, a lot of the people that get elected to federal office in particular, but really any office, because of the, it is no longer that you can declare in March of the election year and take a short hiatus from your job. You have to run for 2 years. You have to give up your job and your income for 2 years. It creates a system where it's wealthier people who are serving in office who are not reflecting kind of the income and the struggles of people in this country, male or female, Democrat or Republican. And so I think I actually categorize this less as a woman issue and more as an income equality issue, that I think you'll have more middle-class people run for office if candidates can take salaries. And so I think that it's the craziest thing that it's stigmatized, because all it does is reinforce the value of wealth in running for office.
And additionally, I'm glad you brought up the point about childcare. It only applies to federal candidates. And I think that in terms of addressing the pipeline problem, I mean, there are other rules like that we can integrate at the state level, to help kind of build that bench. And I know in California, they're putting forward an assembly bill this year to make it legal in California to do so. So I think that there are also some of those rules that we can look into as well. But I think it is an income inequality issue. I think that's a really good point.
Just a tactical question about getting elected. I'm wondering if any of you have any thoughts about advantages or disadvantages women face in terms of using things like, is TV better for women or harder, or is digital better or harder, is male digital easier or harder, just in terms of the unique attributes that women bring to races, and sort of what experiences you've had in terms of using different tools and what might work best in terms of electing folks.
I'll let the media people take it.
I was going to say, when it comes to the channel you're using to communicate to voters, I think it's agnostic to the gender and really depends on the electorate and your strategy and how tele or photogenic your candidate is.
All right, do we have one more? Okay.
A few of you talked about the barrier to the qualifications question, that a lot of women feel like maybe they don't have the qualifications, et cetera, and that might be a barrier to getting them to commit. Do you feel like that there's something that we as an industry can do to change the definition of what a qualified candidate looks like? Because the voters have been changing that definition for us in terms of who they're choosing to elect and put into office. People that we call unqualified, the voters say, no, we like them. Do you think there's something as an industry we should be thinking about changing in terms of what our list of qualifications is for a good candidate, especially as it relates to women?
Well, I think you can overcome a lack of experience with talking about your issues agenda. What are you going to accomplish if you get elected? To me, that's always a great way to overcome doubts about experience. Every race is about the future. And if you have a great message and, agenda in terms of what you want to accomplish, then that makes it easier to overcome, a lack of experience.
And Justin did a nice job earlier talking about sharing your own experiences. And I think this is something as conservatives, again, looking to see how Democrats did such a great job recruiting first-time female candidates. You don't have to be an elected official. Maybe being a mother is enough in your situation. Maybe being a teacher, some kind of educator, healthcare provider, veteran, small business owner, you name it, the list goes on, that make people qualified certainly to serve in public office without having to do that first step. And I think as long as we change our mentality as an industry when we have those recruiting conversations and help potential candidates see their strengths as opposed to perceived weaknesses, that's a huge step for us forward.
And I just think that internally, kind of we as a party I don't think that people look at someone who's a teacher, or who's a mom, or who's this or who's that and says, you're not qualified from a resume standpoint, because we've all seen enough cases of a candidate with a compelling story, which can be a personal story, it can be a secondary experience, it can also just be a powerful voice for speaking for others, even if it's not that they've done something from a resume standpoint. I think the thing that people walk out of meetings, whether it's with potential consultants, a potential manager, with party committee folks, and say they're not going to be able to put the money together. it's great. They're a great candidate. You know, they're great on paper, or they're very compelling, but they're not going to be able to put the money together. And so I think what we can actually do there is look at the fact that there is so much money out there to give to good candidates, and they may not have the Rolodex themselves, and giving those types of candidates the boost and, you know, getting them in front of donors who may not know them otherwise in the early days so that they've got the seed money that they need to legitimize their race. I think that's the biggest barrier beyond a resume.
And I think also that you can't be what you can't see. And I think that as we have more examples of women running and winning, these candidates, these especially first-time candidates with compelling stories, can point to a success and be like, she did it, I can do it too. And I think especially with women and women of color, we're going to see more of that in the next cycles ahead. And so I think that what we're really talking about is a culture change in terms of credibility. And real culture change takes almost a generation to do so. So I'm very optimistic about where we're going as an industry and as a society as well.
Great.
Can I share a statistic? I'm standing here with Walt DeVries, who together with Joe Napolitan is one of the founders of the AAPC, and he shared with me that at the first AAPC conference, the attendance of women was about 2%. They can think of 3 names who were there at that meeting. We are currently at 32%. So still a lot of work to get to half, but considerable progress in this time.
All right, and I think we have to wrap up. I have one quick question. I actually don't even know if you all have clients in the Democrat presidential primary, but there are a couple of women in that primary. I wonder if you all think that a woman voter will win the Democrat presidential primary. It's like going down her client roster to see if she, no, I'm just kidding.
Well, objectively speaking, I think it's too early. You know, I think if anybody predicts who the nominee is going to be, they're just lying to you. And because who knows what could happen in this 24/7 media environment, anybody can fall on their face. I think what we're seeing, though, is history being made with all of these incredible women running. And I think that they all have something to offer to different voters. But I think still, women are not going to vote for women just because they're a woman. It's really going to be policy driven.
I think a woman will be on the Democratic ticket. I feel pretty confident about that. Whether they lead the ticket or not, I don't feel like I can predict at this point, but I feel pretty confident there will be a woman on the ticket.
Yeah. Okay. No.
Democratic primaries wouldn't be my area of expertise. But I will say, you know, I think we're making progress. The General Social Survey out of the University of Chicago, 84% now say that women are, just as able as men to hold political office. And that's up, going up every year. And as the father of a daughter who, rightfully thinks she can do anything she puts her mind to, and who started trying to write political direct mail at age 8, I think this is a good thing. So I think we're making progress.
And it sure will be neat to see potentially so many women on the debate stage. I'm really looking forward to seeing more fundraising numbers come out to see how these women perform and if we'll get to see them all up there. So it'll be interesting.
Well, thank you guys. Thank you everybody for your time. Thank you everyone for showing up.